Hi, everyone. Welcome, welcome. I'm so happy to see everybody. And Ray, you are the star of the show today. So I'm just I'm just thrilled to be with you and celebrate your work and have this incredible and important critical conversation with you. My goodness. I sometimes say I can scarcely think of a more important topic and relevant topic for the progress that we want to see.
2:30 call.
So thank you very much for writing this book and for sharing your story so vulnerably and sharing your own journey as not just maybe a teacher and a guide for us, but your own learning journey within that, which is
Thank you, Jennifer.
beautifully done.
Come on.
I noticed when you said star, the part of me is like wants to shy away from that. And the word that I would offer for myself, or the phrase, is servant leader. That just feels better. That feels better for me.
I like that. Well, we're gonna explore that because I think that's a beautiful illustration of the balance. And I think we have somebody on not on mute. Everybody,
Not on mute. Yes.
Let's see here. Hold on. Let's see. Okay, great. Thank you so much. That's much better. Yeah, Ray. So I just want to like celebrate you and pick up. Maybe we start with what you just shared. I know you, and we've had lots of conversations about the way you've stepped to the front and how reluctant you've been to do that. And I experienced the same thing when I started writing books. I had a huge attack of an imposter syndrome, like debilitating, to the point where, and it's kind of still happens sometimes, like it's not just the first book, where I almost said to the team, can we delay the launch? Like, I don't know if I'm ready for this to be out there. It is so vulnerable to write a book and then to put it out there with the confidence that we're supposed to put it out there because we're authors, right? Right. And we invested so much, but it doesn't mean though that we don't doubt ourselves, every step of the way. And I want to know, like, what was this process like to write this, and how did you grow through it? What was uncomfortable? And and if you're in the middle of discomfort, tell us about that. What does that feel like?
So there's a lot of questions in there, and I'll do my best to answer all of them. But I think around this whole imposter syndrome thing and writing a book, I first want to like own my gobs of privileges. And the reason why I want to do that is because it's going to support my answer. So I'm a white, cisgendered, heterosexual, economically privileged, tall guy privileged. I'm 6'3.5", able-bodied, a whole host more. And with that comes a responsibility. And so for me, on my own journey, my own DEI journey, I've had to like keep my ego in check, because there's a part of me that like loves to be out in front. However, people that are closest to me, including some of my advisors, have said, Ray, you can ride this wave as long as you want, as long as you remember it's not about you. And I had to kind of go through some discomfort to really understand what that meant, so that now, as a white, cisgendered, heterosexual man, I look at this from an accountability perspective. I did a keynote on one of the Better Man conferences, and I came up with this notion of the dynamic duo of allyship, superpowers of privilege and accountability, and putting those together. So I share that because, given I have a platform, given that I'm a white guy, if I decenter myself so much to the point where I'm not being responsible or bringing what I'm bringing, or not modeling for other white male leaders, then I'm doing a disservice to the community, to the world. And so I share that. Now, with respect to writing a book, I write a book when there's so much up here that I got to get it out, and it comes from a place of service. And so when I wrote my first book, I was challenged by a guy who said, Ray, you're playing a one-to-one game. You need to play a one-to-many game, and you need to write this book. So I wrote Wake Up, Man Up, Step Up for men, not in corporate, to go on a journey of emotional healing. And when I came to write this book after I founded the Better Man Conference, I had no idea how steep of a learning curve I put myself on. So when the time was right, and men kept asking me, Ray, what do I do? Ray, what do I do? And DEI practitioners were asking me, how do I engage the men? How do I engage the men? And then everybody else who didn't identify like me are like, how can we support? How can you support us? That's when I wrote the book. So it was a long, involved process, but the blessing of COVID was that I just put myself in my office and I wrote it. And when I was too tweaked, I rode my bike. And then the next day was a new day.
That's so good. Thank God for the outside and exercise and anything that kind of breaks us and from our habit and routine and or our spiral. You know, if we're in one of those, I mean, it just hits the reset button. Yeah. You just said, oh, so many things, Ray. I want to pick up on one, the privilege and accountability and knowing when to step in and when to step aside and when to step back.
Yes.
And that comes from experience of when am I needed? When am I needed? Like, when can I do something unique or contribute something that only I can contribute in this moment? And then the question becomes, who else can contribute? And can I work from behind to line those things up, maybe, which is one way that we use what we have access to. So it's not always, we are not always the problem solver, right? The generosity of the team approach to say, I am one, I'm not necessarily a hub. Sometimes I'm a spoke, sometimes I'm a hub. I'm moving from the outside to the inside of these concentric circles in terms of how I'm thinking about the problem that I'm witnessing, the opportunity that I'm witnessing, the person that I want to support. And so, but step forward, step in, step aside, step behind, step back, you know, that's tricky. I mean, I wonder, you know, if you think of yourself in terms of where are you developing those nuances in terms of how and when you make your contribution, or whether you make your contribution, or you know, how have you been developing that? Because I think it's such a confusing point for our male allies in training, because we like to say we're only an ally when someone in an affected community calls us an ally. So it's not for us to say, it is for us to aspire to, but it's not a label we can give ourselves. So how do you think about, I might ask you your evolution. Was it a step back first and now it's like now it's a step in, you know, and is it feeling awkward and self-conscious but exciting? And sort of what is your next stage of development, do you think, in terms of, you know, broadening out your capacity as a voice like this?
What comes to mind is your allyship continuum, and how in the beginning, what I learned to do, and hence what I'd offer to the men, and this also applies to anybody wanting to be an ally to anybody, is to step back and step inside to become introspective and aware of your language, your behaviors, and how they can impact other people. Because unless I, as an ally in training, start to do that, I'm going to myopically and unconsciously be impacting other people. And that's not what I want. So that first step of awareness is critical. Once I start developing that muscle, there might be a step in. Now this is nuance, so it's macro and micro. So in one-on-one behaviors, I might have to, if the psychological safety of another person is threatened, I might have to step in and literally intervene, right? I might have to step aside and pull a man saying, hey, I've got some feedback for you. Do you have a minute? Presuming the answer is yes, I want to bring to your attention what you said and did and the impact, and then pose a question to him. Now, the evolution continues, because one of the things I learned with the Better Man Conference right out of the gates was having an intersectional intention of bringing different voices and perspectives to the stage. And I knew I had my place, but I learned lessons along the way that sometimes I decentered myself so much, I got feedback, Ray, where were you? Right? And so, so here I am, 2022, with the perfect storm of Time's Up, Me Too, Black Lives Matter movement, COVID, the Great Resignation, and the spotlight is on the majority, which is men. And when I see that, and I understand that a minority of men have been controlling the narrative, I sit there and go, okay, I got to go out there and be the white male leader. And if I have to be vulnerable and go first, call in some of these guys, lovingly challenge them, then that's my responsibility. So there's that dynamic duo of accountability and privilege. So I have to use both of those. So 2022 and beyond, for me, it's showing up, the pun of my book, stepping up and bringing up everybody else.
I love that. Beautiful. You said majority. So interesting that I heard a new term I'm going to share with everybody yesterday. By PGM, Black and Indigenous people of the global majority. So think about this for a moment. When we use majority minority language, we have to qualify it and define it. And this is why I've never liked the word minority. But I people of the global majority caught me, because we are a minority majority, nation world now, right? So our demographics have shifted, and yet we don't see that reflected in leadership. And so, Ray, what I think you're saying is, you just said a minority of men have been controlling the narrative. And I also hear in that there's a style of male leadership that has also been normed and rewarded. And we need to bust out of that also, because the minority that has the majority power is what I'd probably say, to be very specific. Within that, there is a total straitjacket that's limiting in terms of our ability to show up as full humans and exhibit some of the things you write about in the book, even for leaders, and perhaps especially for the leaders that dominate organizations. There is a liberation that has to happen on a personal level. And that's huge to you, I know, and to me too. How would you characterize, the mix that's happening at that level, and what's the opportunity?
Well, the opportunity in the mix has me want to, this is the Better Man Conference plug, but the themes this year are patriarchy, power, and privilege. And so that minority style leadership slots right under patriarchal leadership. And so to dismantle or reconstruct what that could mean, to change our relationship with power, right, and to use our privilege to support other people, to me is the way forward. And so, in order to do that, us guys and everybody else, we talk about the man box a lot. Those unwritten rules of what it means to be a man that lie in the darkness. That if we don't step back and become introspective, they'll run our language, then they'll run our behaviors. And so I choose to shine the light on them for a moment or three, and then shift over to healthy masculinity as a cornerstone or a way forward, so that men and everybody who doesn't identify like them can collaborate.
And yeah, so the safety that we all need, the psychological safety and the real safety to break out of the box that we're in.
Yeah.
And I wonder if many days, if the organizations are ready to have that kind of courage to, redefine leadership and what's rewarded, what's measured, what's supported, what's rewarded, what's lauded, what's celebrated. And it can feel we all know there's a wholesale change that we want to see and that's needed in order to take organizations into the future. But there's still so much fear of breaking out of that man box that you just shared. And I encourage everybody, by the way, if you're curious about man box and you haven't heard the TED Talks on it, et cetera, Ray, where would you point folks to get a primer on that?
Tony Porter, A Call to
Mhm.
Men. He does a phenomenal TED Talk. It's widely viewed. Tony's been on our Better Man stage. He's a friend, supporter. I support him. They do great work. And so that would be the place I would look to
Yeah.
for sure.
Yeah. Somebody asked, and you're getting a lot of claps for Tony Porter in the chat. Uh, Somebody asked, what about the risk that some of us have to undertake when we point out what our leaders don't perceive, without, we take that risk of being dismissed, ostracized. You would argue even those within that inner circle take the risk of being ostracized, et cetera. But it's a different kind of risk, I think,
That's right.
than for some of us to speak up. So can you say a little bit more about that?
Yeah. So what that brings to mind and heart, and I've talked about this as well, is my decision to be at the affect of my white male fragility or to step into my white male ability. And so my white male fragility has me stuck in fear of, and I'm just talking as a cisgendered white guy, but if I choose to step in and point out behavior, what might happen to me? I could be ostracized. I could be ridiculed. I could be kicked out of the boys club. Same thing as being ostracized. But even inherent, when I talk to white men about this, the risk I face because of my white male privilege is very different than somebody of color or a woman or anybody else for that matter, who already is struggling and putting forth a ton of effort just to be who they are inside an organization. So my encouragement, and I have to do this myself. I have to be willing to be unpopular. I have to be willing to be canceled. And I've had to confront these issues, like, would my wife still love me? Would my kids still love me? Would I still be able to ride my bike? I mean, yeah. So it's just like, there's a part of me that says, breathe into the fear and move forward and stay committed, right? And it comes down to relationship. So if you have a relationship with somebody, and if I heard your question right, it's like, what if somebody above you with a more senior leadership position, is doing this? Well, nobody likes to be told what to do. And one of the things about feedback, and because this can be couched as feedback, is, hey, I want to get to know you a little bit better, and are you open for me giving you some feedback, because I'm at the affect of it? Now, they might say no, but if you don't ask, you don't get. So this is very, very nuanced stuff, but I just want to do my best to answer that question for you, because I just want to acknowledge that I'm not inside an organization. It's easy for me out here. I have I'm not in an organization privilege, right? Just as I think about that. So, yeah.
I do too, all the time, Ray. We can really, risk for us is, what is it? I mean, we get to be the truth tellers, the agitators in a very different way. And for those of you who are outside organizations, you know what we mean. We don't necessarily have to be the diplomats. We can go straight to it, and be perhaps listened to differently. And that is the definition, right?
Darla just said consultant privilege. I like that. I gotta remember that one.
I'm adding that to my list. Ray, so you just role modeled and shared the language of the invitation for feedback. And it reminds me of like where and how we approach these really important conversations that could be a big aha for somebody. Is so important. And we talk a lot about the call-in. Perhaps in addition to the technique of call out, we talk about the call-in, the invitation to learning, and the nuance of how we get feedback has so much to do with how we can hear the feedback.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe who we get the feedback from can also be. But you've got a lot of folks who are afraid of the ripple effect and the punishment, for example, that could happen from calling in a leader. Particularly somebody who's more senior than we are, but that we really want to invest in their leadership journey, their learning journey, point out things that maybe they don't perceive about themselves. but
Right.
approaching this feels so delicate and so risky. So I just wondered if there's anything more you want to say about that, and
Yeah,
certainly invite
absolutely.
folks in chat. If you have some good techniques for how to do this, we all know it's important, right? It's critical because the emperor has no clothes. Leaders are isolated. They have no idea. They are a different generation. They are a different demographic. And sometimes it's like, how could they not know this? But they don't know. And so I sit with that and say, so what is the call into that person, and who makes it? And if we all did that and we all kind of shored up some others in this way, I think we would be able to accelerate others' journeys. But if it's so fraught, we're not going to do it.
So, couple things. One, this notion of calling in and feedback. I hold that feedback must come from a place of love. I have the 6 heart-based leadership principles of emotional literacy, vulnerability, authenticity, accountability, inclusivity, and love. And so if a leader can do a reset with everybody, because he or she has assuming they identify on as binary, has the ability to set a tone of support accountability, meaning I'm going to invite everybody in advance of how we're kind of moving through this thing called life at work, to give everyone permission to, when someone goes unconscious and says something impactful, to have permission to go up and say, hey, are you open? I want to point out something, because we're all in this space of growth. Now, that might be a big ask, but if you started on the front end and you create an environment where someone's going to point out my gaps, and I've asked ahead of time, and even though someone gives me feedback, because I had to learn how to do this when I was working my way through leadership in the Mankind Project. Someone taught me a long time ago that 70% of feedback to you is someone else's projection, but the stuff that that you want to defend, that you don't want to pay attention to, that's the stuff you pay attention to. And you say, thank you for the feedback. And you go talk to somebody else and you learn and you work things through. Now, that requires a lot of setup by a leader who has that position. But imagine what might be possible if we were all in this together, knowing we're human, knowing that we go unconscious sometimes, but we've got our friends and our colleagues to help us stay awake. It'd be a different world.
It would be a different world. And it can be, if I let you all probably hear me say this a lot if you're on our lists and my calls, but if you're not uncomfortable, you're not leading.
Yeah.
What we sign up for when we lead is to grow, and we cannot grow without the stretch.
Right.
The discomfort, having a mirror held up, examining our lenses and recognizing the limitations of those lenses. I think there's some questions in chat, Ray, about methods and approaches with this.
Yeah.
And somebody says, that is there a way to get somebody to see that this is a way for the leader to become more effective and gain more power? Yes. I mean, I definitely have tried to share language and rationale with my executive audiences to say, this is nothing less than the tools of transformation and relevance for you as a leader, as a human, because by the way, you will be challenged with these issues in your family, in your community. Like, the world is changing, and a lot of us feel, gosh, I'm not sure I'm equipped right now, and this is unfamiliar, and I'm in new territory, and what got me here won't get me there, to quote Marshall Goldsmith. So I say to leaders, this is not eating your spinach. This is not chore.
Right.
This is wrapped up in and very core to our evolution to meet this moment and every moment that's ahead effectively. Meet it and maximize it.
Yeah.
If we know how to do this well, we're going to retain people. We're going to create more innovation out of our teams. We're going to stay on the right side of social change and social justice issues, and sort of be able to be nimble and respond in an authentic and informed way, and not be caught off guard and, futz around and create more damage because we're just so out of, like you said, I think you used the word unawake. Nobody can afford to be unawake. It's just not, so what I think we need to then catch up on though, then is, okay, what gets measured gets done in organizations. I mean, my question always is sort of, okay, so what is this competency and how will we then define it and measure it? And it's never been taken seriously.
Yeah.
Frustrating.
The presumption that we can build off of is that these leaders, if asked the question, how is it that you want to be experienced by others? So you got to be Socratic to a degree, and that's, everything we do, our 4 steps of the ally's journey. Acknowledge our stuff is the first one. That's like, be aware of my bias, my privilege, my emotions in the man box. But the second one, listen with empathy and compassion, is a gateway to understanding the lived experience of other people. And inherent in that becomes, how do I want to be experienced by them? Do I want to be the inclusive, relatable, vulnerable, authentic, powerful, but a different kind of powerful in my own vulnerability, that other people, as a result of me being that way, feel called forward to contribute their whole self? That's a whole different conversation. So in the work you do, Jennifer, and the work I do, I always ask that question: how do you want to be experienced? Are you even interested? Because if not, it's over before it started. But I've yet to hear anybody say no. So that's the inroads right there. And in terms of what's measured, it's so early in the game around engaging men. I want to see more and more and more and more and more men putting themselves on the path of being an ally. I talk about in my book the 5 states of men, and how each of them, and I share these 5 states of men because it helps men understand where they are. It helps organizations understand that these states of men exist in their company that might require a slightly different nuanced approach. But it also helps people that don't identify as men to understand what's lurking in their companies. And so those 5 states of men, if you want me to speak to them real quick, then we can riff on that a little bit. So there's a state of men, there's a group that feel threatened by DEI initiatives because it threatens their job, underscore their, which is indicia of their unexamined privilege. Our friend Michael Kimmel said, privilege is invisible to those who have it. And so even those guys, they're in fear, they feel threatened. It's about humanizing the privilege as opposed to demonizing the privilege, and seeing if they're open to being educated. Longer conversation, but that's just the first state. Then there's a second state of men who don't feel included. They're the ones that voice, oh, there's an ERG for women, LGBTQIA+, and et cetera. And they're like, well, what about us? And with that group, it's like, okay, sounds like they want to be involved. Maybe we can point out their feeling of exclusion so they can start practicing their empathy muscle, and then have them pivot, right? The third group is the biggest one. Those guys that are afraid to say or do the wrong thing, so they do nothing, which makes them complicit. That's a huge faction of men inside orgs, and cancel culture, all that does is inflame them. And they're like, what do I do? What do I do? The fourth group is they want to do something, they just don't know what to do. I love those guys. And the fifth group are the few, the proud, the advocates, and those are the ones that we have to leverage. So whenever I talk to an organization, I used to never do this, but I'm like, I need to talk to your CEO. And they're like, why? I said, because I need to understand why this is important to them and what their level of commitment is. Because for so long, they would punt these issues down to the DEI department, hamstring them with a small budget, and sign some pledge and think that they're doing the work. So, and that's not how it works. So things are changing in a good way. I keep seeing more and more organizations open to this. I just have to decide how big of a hammer do I use.
Oh, right. Every day.
I'm like the white. I mean, I'm gonna swing it from a place of love, of course, right? But that's what has to happen.
That's right. And it strikes me, we've talked about this with, maybe 200 male leaders used to show up to the physical Better Man conference, and realizing everybody's at a different place.
Yeah.
and wrestling with a different belief system and assumptions and readiness to change,
Yeah.
and capturing that, because meeting the learner where they're at is so critical. Otherwise you're just literally, spitting into the wind, so to speak, because it's not going to land. So
Right.
when you, right. And so the question and this challenge you and I always have as we talk about when you gather, what does the learning process look like? Segmenting people out. And again, I'll put a little asterisk. It might be like, a self-report situation where we may be patting ourselves on the back as being more, further along than others might, right? Too. So there's that. So other fly in the ointment. So it's like as a strategist around learning and creating aha moments and moving people forward, it feels, I'm so glad you segment out where the learners are in a
Yeah.
continuum of, it's a continuum of comfort and skill. And you all know I have a podcast called The Will to Change. It's a will continuum. And that will is where it really gets juicy, Ray, with the like, why do people awaken? How do we keep people awake and doing right beyond that first aha to the next aha to the, and it gets truly to this kind of deep conversation about our human, why do we do the things we do? Why do we care about the things we care about? And how can I invite or create a circumstance where people begin to care, where people begin to move through the learning journey, where people begin to put more time and energy towards it, or seek more support, or start to go to the better man and just investigate. And then the self accountability of, this is something I'm going to assign to myself. Is this development? Is this evolution? And so anyway, I know that everybody's at a different place. It can feel a little bit hard to know what's most, you just alluded to where most people are on the five, in the five. I wonder, then how do you, let's just assume limited resources, although I don't think that's true. I think there's always, the resources will show up for the best work that has to happen. But where do we put our energy, do you think?
So a couple things I've learned over the years with respect to men, and again, that's the lane I try and stay in, but it applies to anybody. But these two words, shame and blame, are huge words that we want to stay acknowledged, so that when we seek to meet men where they are, that's another phrase, meeting them where they are is critical, devoid of shame or blame. And while you and I are pretty learned in this space, it seems without fail that right before a Better Man conference, I make a mistake that I end up owning on stage. So the notion of being forever an ally in training is safe. I'll never be too big for my britches, and staying in the beginner's mind, always willing to learn, enables me to once again use my privilege, be vulnerable, tell on myself, to make it possible for other men to do the same thing. So whenever we do a conference or a training, I'll talk to somebody in the DI department. I'm like, all right, who's your most human senior male leader that's willing to tell on himself? And they're like, why are you asking that? I'm like, well, if he gets up there and talks about his journey of becoming an ally and an inclusive leader, and he tells on himself, he makes a mistake, he says maybe he's afraid, he does these things, it's going to make it possible for all the other men to step up, if you will. So it's really, really important, So I say that because if we're going to create the change that we all want to be part of, more and more and more men are going to have to take a breath and step off of the sidelines. And the whole point of me creating the name Better Man for the Better Man Conference is that it's aspirational. So I believe that there's a lot more good men out there. They just need some guidance and some encouragement. And most of the time, it needs to come from guys that look like them, so that we don't put the burden on majority folks. Minority, it's not majority, marginalized folks. The right M word.
That's the right M word. I like that. Indeed. The emotional labor that a lot of us have been putting in for a long time to bring the word, right? To deliver the message, to put our shoulder to the wheel. And then the sense that so many others are kind of sitting on the sidelines, not knowing whether to engage, how to engage, or perhaps feeling excluded from the work.
Yeah.
There's a really interesting question in the chat. I just have to read it because I'm thinking about it. Thanks so much. I don't know who asked this, but the very language of engaging men puts the burden on others to do the work, to get them involved, to make a good enough case for them to extend energy. Ooh, that hurts, but it really hits. Welcome to my world. I call this twisting myself up into pretzels to try to get, try to create or affect a change or create an aha moment, like, or convince, or, show 15 different statistics that somehow still don't convince, right? And at some point you're like, the resistance is intrinsic in others. It is not for me to solve, right? So I really appreciate this question. How do we change the language to the assumption of engagement and the decision they make to disengage?
If I look at what's current, and you have an awakening group of men, and there's a huge group of men that have the blinders on because they're not feeling the pain, then the responsibility, the pain of exclusion, then the responsibility does rest with men and organizations to shine the light on the opportunity and the responsibility for these men to be better allies and better leaders. So I really appreciate what that person said about the very notion of engaging men. The temptation is to put the burden on marginalized folk, when in reality, it's us guys, which is why I've been banging the drum for so long, doing a conference. And I could not have done it without people that don't look like me. So I've put myself forward to be an ally to those people that don't look like me, to support them in their roles, right? And so one of the things I learned to do a while ago, when I'd be talking to a person of color or a woman in a DEI role, I'd say to them, this heavy lift shouldn't be on you. Is there like one white guy that you know that you have a relationship that you could like have a heart-to-heart conversation and ask for his help? I said, good guys, if you ask them for their support, they're going to say, well, yeah, what would that look like? Now they're going to come up with, they have to go through their own stuff. Oh my God, if I say that and do this. But that's how I try and shift things so that people in those roles in diversity, equity, and inclusion departments experience me as an ally, right, externally, and I'll give them some guidance so it doesn't need to fall on them, because it's our turn. Us guys, we need to step up.
Yeah. Love it, Ray. Thank you. This is such good language. I hope everybody goes back and listens to this, because sometimes people need a nudge, and where they're stuck is language. And I don't think we should be cheap about helping with that. I think we should be generous, because we're all learning a new language. I'm learning a new language about gender pronouns, and I'm LGBTQ plus, and I've been out for 25 years, and I'm learning a new language. And if nobody stopped me and said, here's what we say now, here's, Jennifer, what I think you might want to position differently, I'd be horrified not to know that. So help me help you, help us help each other. I don't think it's time to not be generous with our lived experience, and language is changing so quickly that I think it's really unrealistic to expect anyone to know about the absolute latest about every single community of identity, particularly those that they don't have the lived experience of. So I appreciate the point you just made.
There's
Ray.
something I want to say real quick, because I get this, I hear this a lot from my not so aware friends, but it always comes in the form of they make a statement like, I don't want to say anything, I'm being totally scrutinized, and they punt, pardon the sports metaphor, the responsibility of being awake. And there's a way that all of us, regardless of how we identify, can continue to move forward. And that is, we have to remember that we're human and that we're going to make a mistake. So you can't undo what you said or didn't say or did or didn't do. But when it's pointed out to you, you have a phenomenal opportunity to own what you did, how it landed on the other person, and a resolve to commit to learn more. So in our third step of the allies journey is take responsibility for the unintended impact and when necessary, clean it up. So I have a fail safe and then commit to new behaviors, which is the fourth step. So I have a fail safe method that says, okay, Ray, come from your heart. You might screw up. You might say the wrong thing, even though you're trying to stay awake, but don't worry, keep going. If you mess up, fess up, clean it up, and get up and show up and keep going, right?
That's awesome. That's like gold. What page is that in the book? I missed that. That's good.
It's a meme. It's a meme. Maybe it's in the next book. I don't know.
You talk about pushing through fragility to ability. I hope everybody heard that neat turn of phrase that Ray has been using, and it really sticks with me. The fragility, boy, do we go into the shame, the embarrassment, I'm going to take my marbles and go home because that didn't go well. Boy, do we, and that is the ego. The ego has been bruised. So that's what happens. Let's just be honest about it, and the ego might be, I thought I was a good leader. I thought I was great. I thought we were, I didn't realize this, and really good inclusive leaders remember that moment when they were faced with the truth that didn't reconcile with what they believed to be true. And it can be really hard, but I think we just have to manage this ego and this fragility so carefully.
My friends of color, my FOCs, have pointed out to me and helped me understand that this fear that me as a white guy has, it points back to privilege. It's like a slap awake, like, dude, okay, I get that, you're afraid, but your life's not on the line. I was at a sisterhood event in Oakland a couple of years ago, and the whole point, it was white women and black women reaching across the aisle and getting to know each other. And there was 100+ people there, 6 men. I didn't even realize I was the only white guy there. And I was watching these conversations, heartfelt, difficult conversations occurring. And this one woman, this black woman who sat in front of me, responded and said, I'm so committed to this work, I'm willing to take the hits for as long as it takes. Mm. And when she said that, I was like, oh my God. And the woman facilitator looks over and she looks over at me and she goes, did you want to ask a question? I said, actually, what I want to say is I'm sad, I'm angry, I'm afraid that this wonderful woman in front of me said that. And what it makes me realize is that people like me have to be willing to take the hits. And it's a hit of a different variety. Now, I have to be friggin' courageous to do that. And I'm not going to put that on anybody. At the same time, I'm going to invite as many white men as possible to give a think, to be a courageous leader, to kind of get out there in front, because that's what it's going to take to shift the paradigm. Just personal opinion. And that I'll just never forget that. So the whole fragility thing, I have a healthy impatience around it. And I know I'm speaking from my white male privilege, but I'm speaking to other white men that, join me, be courageous. Let's get her done. And let's step aside.
Right. It just feels so good. I get, when I envision you being in solidarity with me, it's such a sadly unusual feeling. I don't know if everybody else kind of is hearing this and imagining, what would it feel like to know somebody's standing by, not just ready and willing to take the hits, but actually stepping in to take them. If that's Ray, if that's the kind of support that I needed and wanted from you, it's such a foreign feeling to feel supported in that way. From my own identities, I'm seeing you and I'm hearing it, and I'm just remarking on how incredible it would feel to know that was the ecosystem around me, and that I could, and that you would I know you, Ray, we talk about the need for aspiring allies to check in and say, what is needed here? And not be the problem solver, the knight in shining armor, full of our own enthusiasm, right? And our new knowledge, and then sort of misapplying it everywhere. And not letting our actions and support be guided and defined by those that we hope to support. So I wondered if there's a story of how you learned that really important lesson, and not making any assumptions about what support looks like.
Have I ever learned it? Oh, there's too many times. I first want to just say this to acknowledge my emotion right now, because it just was present, that just a huge amount of sadness came up. I can be the loud white guy, but underneath that, I'm sad. I'm sad that all this stuff's going on, and then I can move out of the sadness and do what needs to be done. So, to your question, there's too many instances of that, and it's because I have good people that love me, that remind me and keep me honest and mindful, so that when I slip up, I'll clean it up, and I'll step up, and I'll do what needs to be done.
Yeah. And for those on the call, my advice would be, in our zeal to make a difference, that we pause and we check in and we calibrate. And I just want to share a quick story. Some of you may know I'm working on my second edition of How to Be an Inclusive Leader, which was my second book that I wrote. And I'm going to share the story in there. It was during the Stop Asian Hate, the height of that conversation. Organizational leaders in one organization were writing checks, right, supporting advocacy organizations, without checking with the Asian American ERG in the company. What is the remedy in this moment? What do you need? What does support look like? What does it need to sound like and feel like? What is it, instead of us assuming? And so this ERG leader was sharing the story, and she said, if you'd asked us, maybe it would be a check, but what it would really be was, are you outraged? Are you outraged? We want to feel what you're feeling. Like, is this okay with you personally, and as a leadership and as a company? Like, but I want to feel that outrage. And it just hit me so hard that the old remedies and the assumptions that we may make in our lack of that lens of identity about what the solution is, can be misguided, or not enough, or beside the point, or unexpected, so I think I just loved that. And I'll never forget that story, because it reminds me also of my favorite phrase of nothing about us without us.
Yeah. So as I hear you language some of the questions, I ask those questions, but there's a context that I would offer all of us, and that's to hold space. And it's not about doing anything or saying anything, because if I'm a human being, and I'm feeling some pain, I just need someone to hold that space. And so if they come from a place of curiosity, right, which is why that person said, aren't you outraged? It might possibly be, if I sink into that, I am, but now I'm also going, okay, what am I going to do with that outrage? How am I going to channel it? Towards what end? And maybe it may not be me or Jennifer that you have a big old platform, but you can have an effect in a series of one-on-one relationships. You can teach your kids. There's so many things you can do. So you have to take that fuel of those emotions and channel them and move forward, and rhetorically ask yourself, what can I do? Maybe it's a big thing, maybe it's not, but that's the thing. That's what I'm presencing for 2022, channeling those emotions into action, because I've got the platform and the accountability and a whole host of privileges to do so. And I don't want to look in the mirror and go, why didn't you? You could have, right?
We are all given everything we possess, the ingredients of us, we are given them for a reason. And, I thought my battle was the battle for marginalized voices for many, many years. I was not in tune with the privileges that I have. And so that shaped me and my advocacy and the way that I use my voice and who I use my voice alongside and with. But then the dawning recognition of the last 3 or 4 years of the role of those of us who are not taking the risk every day to live our full selves and our authentic selves in some respects, and utilizing what we have access to is our job. That is our job. That is our responsibility. And that is why we were given the things that we were given. So but little do we understand, this is not just an exercise, and it shouldn't be something that's required in your performance review. It is something that is fundamental to our evolution and our development and our own transformation. We are transformed. I have been transformed, Ray, in my explorations of I think of it like the Rubik's Cube of my identity. Like, how do I bring this more into alignment and show it every day, show all of it every day? How do I do that? And how do I talk about it so that others feel safe talking about theirs too? And this is slowly how we shift the ocean liner of company culture, spin the wheel and 20 minutes later, it's just a very gradual turning that starts to happen. But it begins, Ray, with books like yours, voices like yours, and those of us, paving a way, showing how it sounds, what it looks like in practice, demystifying the whole, oh, this is too risky. Because I really love you made that point, and I agree. I say to people, I really don't want to hear about the risk that you think accompanies this, because I know what real risk is and looks like. And that's not it. And if you're not uncomfortable, you're not leading. So next question. That's me when I lose my cool and my I'm like, come on, just get on the train. Even if you're hanging on the caboose by a finger, get on, and then I'll help you. But you need to get on the caboose, and I will reach an arm out. I will absolutely make sure you get on and you don't fall off. And that's what you're doing with this book, Ray. So I just, what are your thoughts about, for this audience, how can we support getting this book into the right hands? Like, what is your hope for it? Anything we can do to support you and the work?
So the financial disclaimer is, I think I make $1.60 on a book. So this is not about money. So I have this vision. I've had this vision from day one. I didn't try to get on any bestseller lists, but to envision the possibilities of getting this book in as many men's hands as possible. Everyone else's hands. But one of the things I learned in men's work is a guy might not be ready for a big men's weekend. He might not be ready to join a men's group, but when no one's looking, he can start reading the book, and he can start thinking. So it's a crawl, walk, run. So if they go to showingupbook.com, we've created the ability for organizations to get the books in the hands of men, to discounted virtual keynotes. They can go to the Better Man conference that you and I are going to be having fun doing in New York in June. You all can go to bettermanconference.com to sign up for the newsletter, but Jennifer will be broadcasting this out as well to keep you informed. And so that's the vision. Turning the ocean liner and getting more and more and more and more men to self-initiate on the path of becoming an ally. That's the vision. At the end of the day, if I'm talking to groups of people about the importance of heart-based leadership in the context of being an ally, it's all good stuff. And so, yeah, I mean, I could say more, but I want to be conscious of the fact that it's 10 o'clock. And
it is.
Yeah.
Oh, Ray. Everybody that goes to my community calls, what we do at the end that I want to give to Ray is our verbal appreciation. So I wonder, can the team enable everybody to unmute? Is that an easy thing to do? Let's see. Maybe if you can unmute yourselves and give Ray your appreciation verbally, 3, 2, 1. Let's tell him what his work means.
Thank you so
Thank you,
much,
Ray.
Ray.
Thank you, Ray.
Thanks,
Thank
Ray.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good job. Good job.
Wow.
Thank you, Jennifer.
Thank
Great.
you.
Thank you, Jennifer.
Yes, thank you, Jennifer.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, Ray. Take that with
Wow.
you. Hold it in your heart. Know that, you know,
Mhm.
you've got this big community behind you, alongside you, in front of you, all the things, right? We're just going to buoy this work and get more male leaders to self-initiate. Like, oh, isn't that beautiful? So let's make that our goal for 2022. And I promise, I know that that is going to get us where we all need to go so much faster, so much more complete. And with all of our participation, which is just such an awesome idea. Thank you,
We're
Ray.
better together. Thank
We
you.
are further, faster. Thanks, everybody. Take care of yourselves. Thanks for doing the work you do.
Thank
See you
you.
later. See you soon.
Thank you.
Bye.